The blood-red sun dipped below the jagged horizon as Abigail Walsh stumbled through the scrubland, her torn dress snagging on every sage brush and mesquite, each painful tug a reminder of how far she still had to go. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her heart race faster than her feet could carry her across the rocky terrain of eastern California. Julian was still miles away, and the October evening of 1873 was quickly fading to darkness. Abigail had fled her father's ranch outside of Banner with only the clothes on her back and a small pouch of coins she'd been secretly saving. The fresh bruise blooming along her cheekbone throbbed in time with her racing pulse, a parting gift from her father's drunken rage. At 20 years old, Abigail had endured her father's escalating violence since her mother's death 4 years prior. William Walsh had always been stern, but grief and whiskey had transformed him into something monstrous. Tonight had been different, though. Tonight, he'd come at her with his hunting knife, slicing through her sleeve as she ducked away. The hoofbeats grew louder. Abigail dove behind a large boulder, pressing her back against the cool stone as she struggled to quiet her breathing. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, stinging the small cut on her lip. "I know you're out here, girl." Her father's voice boomed across the empty landscape. "You think you can just run off, after everything I've done for you?" Abigail closed her eyes, willing herself to become invisible. She could smell the whiskey on his voice even from a distance. "The sun's going down, Abby. You know what happens to pretty girls alone in the dark." His voice had that dangerous sing-song quality that preceded his worst outbursts. She needed to move. Julian was her only hope, a small mining town where she might find work or passage further west. With her father momentarily out of sight, she darted from her hiding place, keeping low to the ground as she moved toward a stand of pines that marked the beginning of higher elevation. As the land rose beneath her feet, Abigail spotted smoke from a chimney in the distance, not Julian proper, but some outlying homestead. Hope surged through her veins. If she could reach it before her father spotted her again, she might find help or at least a place to hide until morning. The small cabin came into view as she crested a ridge. It was a humble structure with a well-tended corral holding 3 horses. A warm glow emanated from the windows, and smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. Abigail hesitated at the edge of the clearing. The occupant could be just as dangerous as her father, but the sound of hoofbeats growing ever closer forced her decision. She ran toward the cabin, her lungs burning and legs trembling from exhaustion. Just as she reached the porch, the door swung open, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warm light inside. "Please," she gasped, collapsing against the porch railing. "My father, he's trying to kill me." The man stepped into the fading light, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind but not yet old. He couldn't have been more than 30, with intelligent blue eyes that quickly assessed her disheveled state. "Get inside," he said, his voice low and steady. Abigail didn't need to be told twice. She stumbled into the cabin as the man reached for a rifle mounted above the door. "My name's Yancy Fletcher," he said, guiding her toward a corner of the single-room cabin. "Stay quiet now." The cabin was simple but tidy, with a small table, a bed in the corner, and a cooking area. Tools of ranch work hung on the walls alongside a few books, an unexpected sight. "He's coming," Abigail whispered, flinching at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Yancy nodded. "Get under the bed, don't make a sound no matter what you hear." Abigail crawled into the narrow space beneath the bed frame, wincing as her bruised ribs pressed against the hard, packed dirt floor. Dust tickled her nose, but she pressed her face into her arm to stifle any sound. Yancy moved about the cabin, dousing most of the lamps until only the hearth provided light. He positioned himself near the window, rifle at the ready but not raised. Then he waited. The hoofbeats slowed as they approached the cabin. Abigail could see Yancy's boots from her hiding place, planted firmly, not shifting nervously like most men would. A heavy knock rattled the door. "Who's there?" Yancy called, his voice betraying nothing. "Name's Walsh." Looking for my daughter, ran off after a disagreement. Girl's not right in the head. Abigail bit down on her lip to keep from crying out at the familiar lie. Haven't seen any girl, Yancy replied. Been here alone all day. Mind if I take a look around? Her father's voice was deceptively polite, but Abigail recognized the dangerous undertone. As a matter of fact, I do mind, Yancy said evenly. It's getting late, and I don't make a habit of letting strangers into my home after dark. There was a pause, then her father spoke again, his voice harder. I know she came this way. If you're hiding her, you're interfering in family business. Yancy opened the door but stood firmly in the entrance, blocking the way. Mr. Walsh, is it? I can see you're upset, but I assure you there's no one here but me. Perhaps your daughter made it to Julian. That would be the sensible destination for anyone out this way. Abigail held her breath, watching Yancy's steady stance from her hiding place. She could see her father's shadow stretching across the threshold. You calling me a liar, Cowboy? Her father's voice had that familiar slur to it that always preceded violence. I'm suggesting you're mistaken, Yancy replied calmly. And I'd advise you to continue your search in town before it gets completely dark. These hills can be dangerous at night. The shadow shifted, and Abigail heard the telltale sound of her father's hand moving to his gun belt. I'll just have a quick look inside, her father insisted. No, sir, you won't. Yancy's voice remained even, but his posture changed subtly. I've been patient, but this is my property. I'm asking you to leave. Listen here, you. No, you listen, Yancy interrupted, his voice suddenly steel. I can see you're armed, and so am I, but I'm standing in my own doorway, and the law would be on my side if things were to get unfriendly. Now, I suggest you head to Julian if you're looking for someone. There's nothing for you here. The tension stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Abigail could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Finally, her father spoke, his voice low and threatening. This isn't over. I know my Abby, and she doesn't have the sense to go far. Good evening to you, Mr. Walsh. Yancy's reply was final. The shadow retreated, and hoofbeats soon faded into the distance. Still, Yancy remained at the door for what seemed like an eternity before he finally closed and bolted it. He's gone, Yancy said quietly, but I reckon he'll be back once he's checked the town. Abigail crawled out from under the bed, her limbs stiff and trembling. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to help me. Yancy lit another lamp, illuminating the cabin once more. In the better light, Abigail could see the concern in his eyes as they took in her bruised face and torn clothing. Looks like you needed helping, he said simply. Are you hurt bad? Abigail touched her cheek self-consciously. Nothing that won't heal. Yancy nodded, then moved to the hearth where a pot hung over the coals. You should eat something, then we can talk about what happens next. As he ladled stew into a bowl, Abigail took in more details of her unexpected savior. Yancy Fletcher was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean build of a working man. His sandy hair was overdue for a cut, falling across his forehead when he bent to tend the fire. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. I can't stay here, Abigail said, accepting the bowl with shaking hands. He'll come back and I won't put you in danger. Eat first, Yancy replied, settling into a chair across from her. Then we'll figure it out. The stew was simple but hearty, and Abigail hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate quickly, almost embarrassed by her eagerness. How long have you been running? Yancy asked once she'd slowed down. Since this afternoon, Abigail replied. About 6 hours, I guess. And your destination? Abigail hesitated. I don't really have one, I just needed to get away. He's never used his knife before. Yancy's jaw tightened at that. Your father's been hurting you for some time then, since my mother died. He was always stern, but after we lost her. Abigail shook her head. The whiskey made him mean. Tonight was different, though. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A man who raises his hand to his own daughter isn't much of a man at all, Yancy said quietly. And one who pulls a knife. He didn't finish the thought. I can't go back, Abigail said, her voice suddenly stronger than she felt. I won't. No, you can't, Yancy agreed. He studied her for a moment. You need a safe place and time to think about where you're headed next. Julian's not far, but it's small. He'd find you easily. I have a little money, Abigail said, touching the small pouch tied at her waist. Enough for a stage ticket, maybe, if I could get to San Diego. Yancy nodded thoughtfully. That might be best, but not tonight and not tomorrow either. Your father will be watching the roads. I can't impose on you, Abigail protested weakly, though the thought of venturing back into the night terrified her. It's not an imposition, Yancy said. I've got space and your father already thinks I haven't seen you. It might be the safest place for now, he paused. Unless you'd rather take your chances elsewhere. Abigail looked around the cabin. It was simple but clean, and Yancy Fletcher had already proven himself to be honorable when he could easily have turned her over to her father. If you're sure. She began. I am, he said firmly. You can take the bed, I'll make up a pallet by the fire. I couldn't, you can and you will, Yancy interrupted gently. You look dead on your feet, Miss. Walsh, she supplied. Abigail Walsh. Miss Walsh, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Too exhausted to argue further, Abigail accepted his offer. As she settled onto the bed, she noticed Yancy checking his rifle before placing it within easy reach of his makeshift bed on the floor. You think he'll come back tonight? She asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Yancy looked up, his expression calm but resolute. I don't know, but if he does, I'll be ready. For the first time since fleeing her father's ranch, Abigail felt a flicker of hope. As sleep claimed her, her last thought was of the steadfast stranger who had placed himself between her and danger without a moment's hesitation. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong, drawing Abigail from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. Yancy was already awake, moving quietly around the cabin as he stoked the fire and prepared coffee. He glanced over at her movement. Morning, he said simply. Coffee's almost ready. Abigail pushed her tangled hair back from her face, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. Thank you for everything. Yancy nodded, then turned back to his task. How are you feeling? Abigail took stock of her body, the ache in her cheek, the stiffness in her limbs from running so far, the tender spots where brambles had torn at her skin. I've been better, she admitted, but I've been worse too. That earned her a quick, assessing look from Yancy before he poured coffee into 2 tin cups. He brought one to her, keeping a respectful distance. I need to check on the horses and do some chores, he said. But I think you should stay inside today. Your father might still be looking. Abigail nodded, accepting the cup with both hands to warm her fingers. What do you do here, Mr. Fletcher? Yancy, he corrected. I raise and train horses, sell some to the army, some to ranchers. It's quiet work, suits me fine. You live here alone. A fleeting expression crossed his face, something like old pain quickly masked. Yes, just me now. Been that way for 3 years. Abigail wanted to ask more but sensed the topic might be unwelcome. Instead, she sipped her coffee and changed the subject. Is Julian far from here? About 5 miles, Yancy replied. Small mining town. Gold's mostly played out now, but there's still a few businesses. General store, assayer's office, hotel, couple of saloons. He paused. Church too, if that matters to you. It used to, Abigail said softly, before my mother died. After that, my father wouldn't go anymore, said God had abandoned us, so we'd abandon him right back. Yancy made a non-committal sound. Grief makes people say things they might not mean. It wasn't just words with him, Abigail said, the bitterness seeping into her voice before she could stop it. Yancy studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. No, I don't suppose it was. He set his cup down. There's food in the larder if you get hungry. I should be back by midday. After he left, Abigail explored the cabin more thoroughly. There wasn't much to see: practical furnishings, a few books on a rough-hewn shelf, tools of his trade. But there was one item that caught her eye, a small daguerreotype in a simple frame tucked on a shelf near his bed. It showed a young woman with a serious expression, her dark hair pulled back severely, but a hint of softness around her eyes. Abigail quickly returned the photograph to its place, feeling like an intruder. Clearly, there was more to Yancy Fletcher than the solitary horse trainer he presented to the world. She found a comb in his few possessions and did her best to untangle her hair. Her dress was beyond saving torn in several places and stained with dirt and blood. She wondered if Yancy might have something she could borrow, but the impropriety of wearing a man's clothing made her hesitate. Midday came and went with no sign of Yancy. Abigail tried not to worry, telling herself he had work to do and no obligation to report his movements to her. Still, by early afternoon, anxiety began to gnaw at her. What if her father had returned? What if Yancy was hurt just as she was considering venturing outside to look for him? The sound of hoofbeats approached the cabin. Abigail froze, her heart hammering. One rider or two, friend or foe. Relief flooded through her when Yancy's tall form passed by the window. He entered a moment later, carrying a bundle under one arm. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting the package on the table. "Rode into Julian to see if your father was still around." Abigail's relief vanished. "Was he?" Yancy nodded grimly. "He was at the saloon asking questions, offering money for information." He gestured to the bundle. "I brought you some things, dress, shoes, hope they fit reasonably well, wasn't sure of your size." Abigail stared at the package, then at him. "You bought these for me." A faint color touched Yancy's weathered cheeks. "Figured you needed something clean to wear, and I don't have anything suitable." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Abigail reached for the bundle. Inside was a simple blue calico dress, modest but well-made, along with a pair of sturdy boots and even a hairbrush. "How can I ever repay you?" she asked, fighting back tears. Yancy looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No need, just seemed the right thing to do." "Did anyone see you buying these? Won't they be suspicious?" "Told Mrs. Parker at the general store they were for my cousin who's coming to visit," Yancy said with a hint of a smile. "First lie I've told in a while, but it seemed necessary." Abigail clutched the dress to her chest. "Thank you." "Truly?" Yancy nodded, then turned toward the door. "I'll be outside tending the horses. Give you some privacy to change." After he left, Abigail quickly stripped off her tattered dress and washed as best she could with water from the basin. The new dress fit reasonably well, perhaps a bit loose in the waist but the right length. The boots were also a good match. With clean clothes and her hair brushed, she felt more human than she had in days. When Yancy returned, he paused in the doorway, a flicker of something crossing his face before he composed his expression. "Better?" he asked simply. "Much," Abigail replied, smoothing the fabric of her new dress self-consciously. "Thank you again." Yancy busied himself with dinner preparations, slicing salt pork and soaking dried beans. Abigail watched him for a moment, then asked, "What else did you learn in town? About my father?" Yancy's hand stilled briefly. "He's telling folks you're not right in the head. That you need to come home for your own safety." He glanced at her. "Most seem to believe him, or at least they're not willing to cross him. He's got a mean reputation." "I know," Abigail said quietly. "There's a stage leaving for San Diego day after tomorrow," Yancy continued. "If you still want to go that route." "I do," Abigail confirmed. "But what if he's watching the stage?" Yancy turned to face her fully. "I've been thinking about that. I know a back trail we could take to intercept the stage a few miles outside of town. He wouldn't expect that." "We?" Abigail questioned. "I'd escort you," Yancy said, as if it were obvious. "Couldn't let you try that alone." Abigail felt a rush of gratitude mingled with something else she couldn't quite name. "You've already done so much," Yancy shrugged. "Job's not finished until you're safely away." He returned to his cooking. "Besides, it's been a while since I've had a purpose beyond the day's work." They ate dinner in companionable silence, the tension of the previous night replaced by a tentative ease. Afterward, Abigail insisted on washing the dishes, glad to have some small way to contribute. As twilight descended, Yancy lit the lamps and pulled out a deck of cards. "Know how to play rummy?" he asked. Abigail nodded. "My mother taught me." They played several hands, the simple game providing distraction from their circumstances. Abigail found herself studying Yancy when he was focused on his cards, the way his brow furrowed slightly in concentration, the careful way he handled the cards with his large, calloused hands. "You mentioned it's been just you for 3 years," Abigail ventured during a pause in the game. "Were you married before?" Yancy's expression closed slightly, but after a moment he nodded. "Briefly. Eleanor took fever the second winter we were here. Doctor couldn't do anything for her." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly, thinking of the daguerreotype she'd seen. "It was a long time ago," Yancy replied, though his tone suggested the wound wasn't as healed as his words implied. "What about you? No beau back in Banner?" Abigail shook her head. "My father discouraged suitors. Said I was needed at home." Understanding dawned in Yancy's eyes. "He didn't want to lose his housekeeper. And his punching bag," Abigail added bitterly. Immediately, she regretted the crudeness of her words. "I'm sorry, that was honest," Yancy interrupted. "No need to apologize for the truth, Miss Walsh." "Abigail," she corrected him, "or Abby. After everything, it seems silly to stand on formality." Yancy's mouth quirked in a small smile. "Abigail, then." They returned to their game, but something had shifted between them, a tentative bridge forming across the divide of their separate tragedies. Later, as they prepared for sleep with the same arrangements as the night before, Abigail found herself watching as Yancy spread his blanket near the hearth. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After I'm gone," Yancy looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "Same as I've been doing, I suppose, train horses, keep to myself." "Sounds lonely," Abigail observed softly. Yancy was quiet for a long moment. "Guess I got used to it." "I don't think anyone really gets used to being alone," Abigail said. "They just learn to live with it." Their eyes met across the dimly lit room, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, recognition of a shared understanding. "Get some rest," Yancy said finally, his voice gentler than before. "Tomorrow we'll need to prepare for your journey." As Abigail settled into bed, she found herself wondering what might have happened if they'd met under different circumstances, if she hadn't been running for her life, if he wasn't still mourning his wife. She pushed the thoughts away. Such wonderings were dangerous when her future remained so uncertain. But as sleep claimed her, Abigail couldn't help but feel that in Yancy Fletcher's quiet cabin, she'd found more than just refuge. She'd found a glimpse of what safety might feel like, of what respect between a man and woman could be. Morning brought a sense of purpose. Yancy outlined his plan over breakfast. They would leave before dawn the following day, taking a seldom-used trail through the hills to intercept the stage at its first stop outside Julian. If all went well, her father would still be watching the stage depot in town, never suspecting she'd boarded miles away. "What will you tell the driver?" Abigail asked. "Won't he find it strange?" "Gus Miller drives that route," Yancy replied. "Known him for years. He's a good man, keeps to himself. If I ask him to take you on without questions, he will. And if my father tries to stop the stage later," Yancy's expression hardened slightly. "Gus carries a shotgun. He won't let anyone interfere with his passengers." Abigail nodded, trying to believe that escape could be so straightforward. "I'll need to repay you for the ticket and the clothes." "We can settle accounts later," Yancy said dismissively. "First priority is getting you safely away." The day passed in preparations. Yancy checked and rechecked his tack, cleaned his rifle, and packed provisions for their pre-dawn journey. Abigail found herself with little to do but worry, until Yancy suggested she write down the names of contacts who might help her in San Diego. "I don't have any," she admitted. "I've never been further than Julian," Yancy frowned. "You'll need somewhere to stay, at least initially." "There must be boarding houses," Abigail said with more confidence than she felt. "And I can work. I'm good with numbers and I can sew." San Diego's growing, but it's still a rough place in parts, Yancy cautioned. A young woman alone. I don't have much choice, Abigail pointed out. Unless you have a better suggestion. Yancy was silent for a moment, then said, I knew a family there once. The Miller's no relation to Gus. David Miller was a blacksmith, good man. His wife Sarah was kind. They might be willing to help at least until you find your feet. Abigail felt a surge of hope. You think they would? I can write a letter of introduction, Yancy offered. No guarantees, but it would be better than arriving with nothing. As he sat down to compose the letter, Abigail watched him, struck by how thoroughly this stranger was involving himself in her welfare. Why are you doing all this? She asked suddenly. Yancy looked up, pen poised over paper. Doing what? Helping me, taking risks, going to all this trouble. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. What else would I do? Turn you away, hand you over to a man who'd hurt you? Many would, Abigail said softly. They'd say it wasn't their business. Yancy's jaw tightened. Then many are wrong. He returned to his letter, adding, My father taught me that a man stands up for those who can't stand up for themselves. That's all I'm doing. But as he bent over his writing, Abigail wondered if that was truly all. There was something in the way Yancy looked at her, sometimes a flicker of something that went beyond duty or basic decency. Or perhaps she was seeing what she wanted to see, confusing gratitude with more complicated feelings. After all, what did she know of men besides her father's cruelty? Yancy's kindness might seem extraordinary simply because her standards had been set so low. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a change in weather. Yancy studied the sky with a frown. Might have rain by morning, he observed. Could work in our favor harder to track us, but it'll make for a miserable ride. I don't mind, Abigail assured him. I've endured worse than a little rain. Yancy's expression softened as he looked at her. I believe you have. As evening approached, a strange tension settled over the cabin. Their plan was set, provisions packed, details arranged. All that remained was to wait for dawn and to acknowledge that this might be their last night in each other's company. Abigail felt the weight of it as they shared a simple supper. What would tomorrow bring? Freedom, she hoped, but also uncertainty. And an end to this brief interlude with the most honorable man she'd ever known. Penny for your thoughts, Yancy said, breaking the silence. Abigail looked up, startled. I was just thinking about tomorrow and after, having second thoughts. No, she said quickly, just wondering what happens next, if I'll be all right. Yancy studied her face. You're stronger than you know, Abigail Walsh, you'll make your way. I hope so, she replied. I've never been on my own before, not really. Few of us are truly on our own, Yancy said. There are good people in this world if you know where to look. The Millers, if they're still in San Diego, others you'll meet along the way. People like you, Abigail said softly. Yancy looked away, seemingly embarrassed by her praise. I've done nothing special. You saved my life, Abigail countered. That seems pretty special to me. A hint of color touched Yancy's cheeks. Anyone would have done the same. No, Abigail said firmly. They wouldn't have. You know that as well as I do. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Something unspoken hung in the air between them, possibility, perhaps. Or regret for what could not be. The spell was broken by a sound outside, a horse approaching at a canter. Yancy was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, before Abigail had even registered the danger. Get down, he hissed, motioning toward the floor. Abigail dropped to her knees as Yancy moved to the window, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. It's your father, he said grimly. And he's not alone. Fear clutched at Abigail's throat. How many? 2 others, Yancy replied, checking his rifle. Stay out of sight. Heavy footsteps approached the cabin, followed by a pounding on the door that made Abigail flinch. Fletcher? Her father's voice, slurred but powerful. Open up, I know you're in there. Yancy positioned himself beside the door, rifle ready but not raised. What do you want, Walsh? I want my daughter. Town folks saw you buying women's things yesterday. You're harboring my Abby. Abigail pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. Her father wasn't alone and he was drunk. The worst possible combination. I told you before, there's no one here but me, Yancy called back. The things I bought were for my cousin. She's visiting next week. A harsh laugh came from outside. You expect me to believe that? Open this door before we break it down. Abigail could hear muttered conversation outside, her father conferring with his companions. She looked desperately around the cabin. There was no back door, nowhere to run. Yancy caught her eye and mouthed silently, under the bed. Then he called out, I'm opening the door, Walsh. But I'm armed and you're trespassing. As Abigail scrambled to hide, Yancy unbolted the door and opened it, his rifle held casually but ready. William Walsh stood on the porch, swaying slightly with two rough-looking men behind him. All three were armed. Evening, gentlemen, Yancy said calmly. It's late for a social call. Abigail's father pushed forward, trying to see past Yancy into the cabin. Where is she? Where's my daughter? As I've told you repeatedly, I haven't seen your daughter, Yancy replied, his voice steady. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd take your friends and leave my property. Search the place, Walsh ordered his companions. No, sir, Yancy said firmly, raising his rifle slightly. You don't have that right. One of the men, a burly fellow with a patchy beard, sneered. 3 against 1, cowboy. You really want to play those odds? I don't want trouble, Yancy replied evenly. But this is my home and you're not welcome in it. The law would back me if this turns ugly. Walsh's face contorted with rage. The law? What does the law know about a father's rights? That girl is mine until she's married, and I'll take her back by force if I have to. Any man who needs force to control his family isn't much of a man at all, Yancy said, his voice hardening. Walsh's hand moved toward his gun. You judging me, horse trainer? You think you're better than me? Yancy didn't answer directly. I think a man who chases his daughter with a knife has forfeited any claim to her loyalty. I think a man who leaves bruises on a woman's face has lost the right to call himself her protector. Abigail held her breath. How did Yancy know about the knife? She must have mentioned it in her exhausted ramblings that first night. So you have seen her, her father growled triumphantly. I've seen enough to know what kind of man you are, Yancy replied. Now, for the last time, leave my property. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. From her hiding place, Abigail could see boots shifting on the threshold, her father and his companions on one side, Yancy standing firm on the other. This isn't over, Fletcher, Walsh finally spat. She's still my daughter. I'll find her with or without your help. Good night, gentlemen, Yancy said firmly, making it clear the conversation was over. Abigail heard muttered curses as the men retreated. Yancy remained in the doorway until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, then firmly bolted the door. They're gone, he said softly. For now. Abigail crawled out from under the bed, her whole body trembling. He'll be back, she whispered, with more men or the sheriff. Sheriff Peters isn't in his pocket, Yancy replied, but you're right that he'll try again. He looked at her seriously. We need to change our plans. They'll be watching the stage now and probably the trails too. What can we do? Abigail asked, despair threatening to overwhelm her. Yancy was quiet for a moment, thinking. We leave tonight, he finally said. Not toward Julian, but north. I have a friend who ranches near Santa Usable. He'd help us. Us, Abigail repeated. Yancy met her gaze steadily. I can't stay here now. Your father thinks I'm hiding you, which I am. He'll make trouble for me whether you're here or not. Abigail felt a wave of guilt. I've ruined everything for you. No, Yancy said firmly. You haven't ruined anything. This was my choice and I stand by it. He moved to gather their already packed provisions. We need to move quickly. They might come back with reinforcements. Within minutes, Yancy had their necessities packed. He handed Abigail a heavy coat. It'll be cold riding at night, especially if that rain comes in. As they stepped outside, the air was thick with approaching moisture. Clouds obscured the stars, promising the storm Yancy had predicted. He saddled 2 horses, swiftly his own roan gelding and a smaller, steadier mare for Abigail. Stay close to me, he instructed as he helped her mount. We'll stick to the trees where we can. They set out at a careful pace, moving away from the cabin that had been Abigail's sanctuary and Yancy's home. She looked back once, seeing the small structure dark and silent in the night. "I'm sorry," she said again, "for all of this." Riding beside her, Yancy shook his head. "Don't be, a home is just walls. What matters is doing what's right." They rode in silence for a time, picking their way through the darkness. The first droplets of rain began to fall about an hour into their journey, soon becoming a steady downpour that soaked through their clothes despite Yancy's precautions. "How far to your friend's ranch?" Abigail asked through chattering teeth. "About 15 miles, Yancy replied, his voice nearly lost in the rain. "We won't make it before dawn at this pace, but we can't risk the horses in this weather." Abigail nodded, though she doubted he could see the gesture in the darkness. Her hands were numb on the reins, and her borrowed dress clung to her body, sodden and heavy. They continued this way for what seemed like eternity, the rain sometimes letting up briefly before returning with renewed vigor. Abigail lost all sense of time, focusing only on following Yancy's shadowy form ahead of her and staying upright in the saddle. Finally, as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Yancy signaled a halt. "We need to rest the horses," he said, dismounting stiffly, "and ourselves." They had reached a small grove of oak trees that offered minimal shelter from the rain, which had finally begun to taper off. Yancy helped Abigail down from her horse, his strong hands steadying her as her numb legs threatened to buckle. "You're freezing," he observed with concern, feeling how cold her hands were. "I'm all right," Abigail insisted, though she couldn't stop shivering. Yancy frowned, then began rummaging in his saddlebags. He produced a flask and handed it to her. "Whiskey," he explained at her hesitation. "Just a sip. It'll warm you from the inside." Abigail took the smallest possible drink, the liquor burning a fiery path down her throat. She returned the flask quickly, memories of her father's drunken rages making even this medicinal use unpleasant. Yancy seemed to understand without explanation. He took a sip himself, then returned the flask to his bag. "We should keep moving soon," he said, "but the horses need a breather." Abigail nodded, wrapping her arms around herself in a futile attempt to generate warmth. Without warning, Yancy stepped closer and enfolded her in his arms, his body heat a blessed relief against the chill that had settled into her bones. "Better?" he asked quietly. Abigail nodded against his chest, too grateful for the warmth to feel embarrassed by the impropriety. "Much." They stood like that for several long moments, the simple human contact providing comfort beyond mere physical warmth. When Yancy finally stepped back, Abigail felt the loss keenly. "We should go," he said, his voice rougher than before. "The rain's let up and we need to make up time." As they rode on, the landscape began to change subtly. The hills became gentler, the vegetation more uniform. In the growing light, Abigail could see cattle grazing in the distance. "We're getting close to Randall's place," Yancy explained. "He runs about 500 head of cattle on this range." "Will he help us?" Abigail asked anxiously. "Aaron Randall is a good man," Yancy replied confidently. "We fought in the war together, he'll help." By mid-morning, they crested a rise that revealed a sprawling ranch below. A large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals spread across the valley floor. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, a welcoming sight after their long, cold ride. As they approached, a man emerged from one of the barns, shading his eyes against the sun that had finally broken through the clouds. Recognition dawned on his face, followed by surprise. "Yancy Fletcher," he called. "What brings you here at this hour, and with company no less?" Yancy dismounted, helping Abigail down before approaching his friend. "Aaron," he greeted the man with a brief embrace, "we need your help." Aaron Randall was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shock of red hair and a full beard. His shrewd eyes took in their bedraggled appearance and the tension in Yancy's stance. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "Yes," Yancy confirmed. "This is Miss Abigail Walsh. She's running from her father with good reason. We rode through the night to get here." Aaron nodded gravely. "Come inside." Martha will get you both warmed up and fed. Then we'll talk. The interior of the Randall home was spacious and comfortable, with a large hearth in the main room and practical, well-made furniture. Martha Randall, a plump woman with kind eyes, took one look at their soaked, exhausted state and immediately set about making them comfortable. "To the fire, both of you," she ordered. "I'll fetch dry clothes and hot coffee." Within an hour, Abigail found herself wrapped in a borrowed dress from Martha, seated at the Randalls' kitchen table with a steaming bowl of stew before her. Yancy, similarly outfitted in dry clothes from Aaron, sat beside her, the color returning to his face as he warmed up. Aaron listened intently as Yancy explained their situation. When he described William Walsh's violent nature and the confrontation at the cabin, Martha made a sound of distress. "That poor child," she said, looking at Abigail with compassion. "No father should treat a daughter so." "Walsh has a reputation," Aaron confirmed grimly. "Even as far as here, we've heard stories. Man's got a temper, especially when he drinks." "He's looking for us," Yancy explained. "We couldn't stay at my place and the roads to Julian will be watched." Aaron nodded thoughtfully. "You're welcome here as long as needed, both of you." Abigail felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Mr. Randall. I don't know how I can repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," Martha assured her. "Any friend of Yancy's is welcome in our home." After the meal, Aaron showed them to rooms where they could rest. Abigail's was small but comfortable, with a real bed a luxury after their night on horseback. "Sleep," Martha advised. "We'll figure out what's next when you've rested." Too exhausted to argue, Abigail sank onto the bed. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd found not just one good person in Yancy, but three proof that her father's cruelty wasn't the rule, but the exception. Abigail slept deeply, awakening only when the afternoon sun was beginning its descent. For a moment, disorientation claimed her another strange room, another unfamiliar bed. Then memory returned, and with it, a curious mix of anxiety and relief. She rose and smoothed her borrowed dress as best she could before venturing downstairs. Voices came from the main room, Yancy and Aaron in serious conversation. "Could leave her here with us," Aaron was saying as Abigail paused in the hallway. "It might be safer," Yancy agreed, though something in his tone suggested reluctance. "Walsh doesn't know about my connection to you." "The girl could help Martha with the house," Aaron continued. "Lord knows we could use another pair of hands around here, especially with the baby coming." Abigail hadn't noticed that Martha was expecting, though now she recalled the woman's rounded figure. The thought of staying here, helping with a household and a new baby, was unexpectedly appealing. It would be a far cry from her father's harsh rule. "What about you?" Aaron asked Yancy. "What will you do?" There was a pause before Yancy responded. "Go back, I suppose, try to salvage what I can." "Walsh might have cooled down by now, or he might be waiting for you," Aaron countered. "Man like that doesn't forgive easily." Another pause, then Yancy said quietly, "I can't just disappear. Everything I've built is there." "Buildings can be rebuilt," Aaron pointed out. "You could start over." "Here even. I've got land to spare, and you know horses better than any man I've met." Abigail held her breath, waiting for Yancy's response. The idea of him nearby, of not having to say a permanent goodbye, stirred something deep within her. "Let me think on it," Yancy finally said. "For now, we need to make sure Abigail is safe." Taking this as her cue, Abigail entered the room. Both men rose at her appearance. "You look better," Aaron observed kindly. "A bit of color back in your cheeks." "Thank you," Abigail replied. "The rest was exactly what I needed." Yancy was watching her with an unreadable expression. "We were just discussing options," he said. "Aaron and Martha have offered to let you stay here if you'd like." "It would be no trouble," Aaron added. "Martha could use the help and you'd be safe here. Walsh has no reason to look for you on our ranch." The offer was generous, more than generous, given that the Randalls barely knew her, and yet Abigail felt a strange reluctance. She glanced at Yancy, wondering what he wanted. "That's very kind," she said carefully. "But I don't want to be a burden." No burden at all, Aaron insisted. An extra pair of hands is always welcome on a ranch. Martha joined them then, carrying a tray of coffee cups. Has Aaron made our offer? She asked, setting down her burden. He has, Abigail confirmed. It's incredibly generous. Martha waved away her thanks. Nonsense, it's what neighbors do. She patted her rounded belly. Besides, with this little one coming in a few months, I could use another woman about the place. Abigail looked from Martha's kind face to Aaron's forthright one, then finally to Yancy, whose expression remained guarded. What did she want? Safety, yes, but also purpose, connection. A chance to build something of her own. May I think about it? She asked finally. It's a big decision. Of course, dear, Martha said warmly. No rush at all. As evening approached, Aaron suggested they all remain indoors. Just to be safe, he explained. Walsh might have men looking for you beyond Julian. They passed the evening in comfortable conversation. Aaron shared stories of his and Yancy's time serving together in the war, revealing a side of Yancy that Abigail hadn't seen. The young soldier, brave and determined, who'd once saved Aaron's life during a skirmish. Never saw a man move so fast, Aaron recalled. One minute I'm pinned down with rebel fire all around me, the next Yancy's dragging me to cover. Took a bullet in the shoulder doing it too. Yancy looked embarrassed by the praise. You'd have done the same for me. Maybe, Aaron acknowledged, but that doesn't lessen what you did. He looked at Abigail. That's the kind of man he is, doesn't talk much about it but always does the right thing when it counts. Abigail nodded, thinking of how Yancy had faced down her father without hesitation. I know, she said softly. Something passed between her and Yancy, then a moment of recognition, perhaps. Understanding. Whatever it was, it made her cheeks warm and her heart beat a little faster. Martha, ever perceptive, suggested they retire early. You both must still be exhausted from your journey, she observed. Rest is the best medicine. As Abigail prepared for bed in her borrowed room, she found herself thinking not of her father or her narrow escape, but of Yancy Fletcher, the quiet horseman who'd risked everything for a stranger, who'd looked at her with such intensity across the Randalls' dining table. Was she imagining the connection between them, mistaking gratitude for something deeper? Or was there truly something growing between them, something that might, given time, blossom into more? These thoughts followed her into sleep, where her dreams were not of pursuit and danger, but of possibilities she'd never before allowed herself to consider. Morning brought clarity with its golden light. Abigail woke knowing what she wanted to do, not just in the immediate future, but beyond. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. She found Yancy alone on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the hills with light. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Good morning, she said, joining him at the railing. Sleep well, he asked, his voice still rough with morning. Better than I have in years, Abigail admitted. I've been thinking about the Randalls' offer. Yancy nodded, waiting for her to continue. It's generous, she said carefully, and sensible. I'd be safe here, but... Yancy prompted when she hesitated. Abigail took a deep breath. But I don't want to live in fear forever, hiding from my father, always looking over my shoulder. She met his gaze directly. I want to build something of my own. To make choices because they're what I want, not because they're the safest option. A hint of admiration touched Yancy's features. What are you thinking? I still want to go to San Diego, Abigail said. Start fresh where no one knows me, find work. Learn who I am without my father's shadow hanging over me. Yancy was quiet for a moment, considering. It won't be easy, he finally said. A young woman alone. I know, Abigail acknowledged, but I need to try. She hesitated, then added softly, unless there's a reason for me to stay. The implication hung in the air between them. Yancy's eyes widened slightly as he understood her meaning. Abigail, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not sure I'm what you need right now, after what you've been through. What I've been through taught me to recognize a good man when I see one, Abigail interrupted. You're nothing like my father, Yancy, nothing at all. Yancy looked out over the landscape, his profile strong against the morning light. "I've been alone a long time," he said quietly. "Set in my ways, and I'm still grieving a leaner in some ways, though it's been years." "I'm not asking for promises," Abigail assured him, "just possibilities, a chance to see if what I'm feeling might grow into something more." Yancy turned to face her fully then, his blue eyes serious but warm. "And what are you feeling, Abigail Walsh?" The directness of his question made her catch her breath, but she answered honestly. "Hope, for the first time in years, and something else I don't quite have a name for yet." A smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him, transformed Yancy's weathered face. "I think I might be feeling something similar." Before Abigail could respond, the door opened behind them as Aaron stepped onto the porch. If he noticed the charged atmosphere, he gave no sign of it. "Got word from one of my men who was in Julian yesterday," Aaron said without preamble. "Walsh is still there, still looking, offering money for information." Yancy's expression hardened. "He won't give up easily." "No," Aaron agreed grimly, "but there's more. Sheriff Peters is starting to ask questions about his behavior. Seems Walsh got into a brawl at the saloon, made some threats. Peters doesn't take kindly to that sort of thing in his town." Hope flared in Abigail's chest. "Do you think?" "Hard to say," Aaron replied. "But if Walsh keeps making trouble, Peters might run him out of the county. He's done it before with troublemakers." Yancy nodded thoughtfully. "That could work in our favor." He glanced at Abigail. "But we still need to get you safely away, at least for now." Aaron cleared his throat. "One more piece of news. Stage to San Diego was delayed by the storm. Won't leave until tomorrow now." Abigail and Yancy exchanged a glance. "That gives us time to make a plan," Yancy said. Throughout the day, they discussed options. Aaron offered to escort Abigail to the stage himself, reasoning that Walsh wouldn't be looking for her with him. Martha suggested she travel disguised as their hired help, with different clothing and perhaps her hair concealed under a bonnet. Yancy listened to all suggestions but seemed distracted, often staring off into the distance with a thoughtful expression. Finally, as afternoon waned, he asked to speak with Abigail alone. They walked a short distance from the house, staying within sight but out of earshot. When they stopped, Yancy turned to face her, his expression serious but with something like determination in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," he began. "About wanting to build something of your own." Abigail nodded, heart quickening at his intensity. "I respect that," Yancy continued. "More than I can say. After Alina died, I thought my life was set, just me and my horses until the end of my days. I never expected." He paused, searching for words. "I never expected you." "Yancy," Abigail began, but he held up a hand. "Please let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to stand in the way of what you need to do. If San Diego is where you need to go to find yourself, then that's what should happen." Disappointment washed through Abigail, though she tried not to let it show. "I understand," she said quietly. "But," Yancy continued, his voice growing stronger, "I'd like to go with you." Abigail stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I'd like to go with you," Yancy repeated. "Not to control you or decide for you, but to see if what's starting between us might have a chance to grow." He smiled slightly. "I know a thing or two about horses. Reckon I could find work in San Diego same as here." Joy bubbled up in Abigail's chest, so strong it felt like it might burst free. "You'd leave your home, your land," Yancy shrugged. "It's just land, and Walsh knows where to find me there." "Maybe it's time for a fresh start." His expression sobered. "But I need you to be sure, Abigail, I don't want you to feel obligated because of what I did, if you'd rather go alone." "No," Abigail said firmly. "I wouldn't." She took a step closer to him. "I meant what I said this morning, Yancy. I feel something for you that I can't quite name yet, but I'd like the chance to find out what it might become." For a long moment, they stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with possibility. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yancy leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief, just the softest meeting of lips, but it sent warmth cascading through Abigail's body. When Yancy pulled back, the look in his eyes made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. "So," he said softly. "San Diego," Abigail nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "San Diego, together." They returned to the house to share their decision with the Randalls. Martha looked unsurprised, perhaps having sensed the connection growing between them. Aaron simply nodded. "I figured as much," he said. Yancy never could resist a noble cause. "This isn't charity," Yancy said firmly, his eyes meeting Abigail's. "This is something else entirely." That night, they finalized their plans. They would travel to the stage stop together the next day, accompanied by Aaron to provide additional security. From there, they would take the stage to San Diego, where Yancy's connections with the Millers might help them establish themselves. As for William Walsh, they would deal with that problem if and when it arose. For now, distance was their best protection. In her borrowed room that night, Abigail stood by the window, looking out at the star-studded sky. Just days ago, she'd been trapped in her father's house, fearing for her life. Now she was on the brink of a new beginning with a man who treated her with respect and genuine care. Was it too soon to call what she felt love? Perhaps. But whatever it was, it felt like the first true choice she'd made in years, possibly ever. Not a choice made from fear or necessity, but one made from hope. From possibility. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, she knew. But for the first time in her memory, Abigail Walsh looked toward the future with anticipation rather than dread. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Abigail dressed in clothes Martha had altered for her, a simple brown dress and sturdy boots, practical for travel. Her few possessions, along with additional items the Randalls had generously provided, were packed in a small carpet bag. Yancy was already in the yard when she came downstairs, loading their belongings onto Aaron's wagon. He looked up as she approached, his eyes warming. "Ready?" he asked simply. Abigail nodded. "As I'll ever be," Martha embraced her warmly. "You'll do fine," the older woman assured her. "Both of you, and remember, if San Diego doesn't work out, you always have a place here." The journey to the stage stop was uneventful. Aaron kept a rifle across his lap, watchful for any sign of trouble, but they encountered no one. The stage was already waiting when they arrived, a sturdy Concorde coach with 6 horses and a driver Abigail assumed must be Gus Miller, the man Yancy had mentioned. "Randall," the driver greeted Aaron with a nod. "Fletcher, didn't expect to see you out this way." "Change of plans, Gus," Yancy replied, helping Abigail down from the wagon. "Miss Walsh and I need passage to San Diego." The driver's eyes flickered briefly to Abigail, noting her bruised face, then back to Yancy with understanding. "Got room for 2, leaving in 10 minutes. As Aaron and Yancy unloaded their bags, the stage's other passengers observed with curiosity a middle-aged couple and a young man in a business suit. Abigail felt exposed under their gaze, conscious of her bruises and the story they told. "Ignore them," Yancy murmured, noticing her discomfort. "They don't matter." Aaron embraced Yancy briefly, then surprised Abigail by doing the same to her. "Take care of each other," he said gruffly, "and write when you're settled." Moments later, they were inside the coach, seated side by side as Gus Miller called to his team. With a lurch, the stage began to move, carrying them away from Julian and all its painful associations. The journey to San Diego would take a full day, with stops to change horses along the way. As the stage rolled south, Abigail watched the landscape change, the hills giving way to coastal plains, the vegetation becoming more lush as they approached the ocean. Beside her, Yancy was a steady presence. Occasionally their hands would brush, and once, when the stage hit a particularly rough patch, he placed his arm around her to steady her. The contact was innocent, practical, but it stirred something warm within her nonetheless. The other passengers kept largely to themselves, though the middle-aged woman occasionally cast sympathetic glances at Abigail's bruised face. No one asked questions, for which Abigail was grateful. As the day progressed, Yancy shared more about San Diego, a growing city with a natural harbor, now connected to the rest of the country by the recently completed Transcontinental Railroad. "It's changing fast," he explained. "New buildings going up all the time, ships coming in from all over. Opportunities for those willing to work." "And the Millers?" Abigail asked. "You think they'll still be there?" "Last I heard, David's blacksmith shop was thriving," Yancy replied. "They had 3 children when I knew them. Good family." The sun was low in the sky when they finally caught sight of San Diego Bay, the water glinting gold in the evening light. Abigail leaned forward, taking in her first view of the place that might become her new home. The town itself was larger than she'd expected, not as big as San Francisco, certainly, but substantial. Buildings of wood and adobe lined streets that ran from the harbor up into the surrounding hills. Church spires and business signs were visible even from a distance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, feeling both excitement and trepidation. Yancy nodded. "Different from what we're used to, but a good place for a fresh start." The stage pulled into the depot as twilight was falling. Passengers disembarked, stretching tired limbs and claiming baggage. Yancy helped Abigail down, then gathered their few belongings. "First order of business is finding a place to stay tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we can look for the Millers." They found lodging in a small hotel near the depot, respectable enough but not expensive. Yancy took one room and Abigail another, adjoining but with a solid door between them. The proprietress, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Healy, raised an eyebrow at Abigail's bruised face but asked no questions. "Dinner's served until 8, she informed them. "Simple fare but plenty of it." Later, after they'd washed away the dust of travel and shared a quiet meal in the hotel's small dining room, Abigail and Yancy sat in a corner of the lobby, planning their next steps. "Miller's Forge should be near the docks," Yancy said. "We'll start there tomorrow." Abigail nodded, then voiced the concern that had been growing as they'd traveled further from Julian. "What if my father follows us here?" Yancy's expression hardened slightly. "Then we deal with it. But San Diego is a big place, Abigail, and getting bigger every day. The chances of him finding us are slim. He's determined," Abigail said softly, "and used to getting his way." "So am I," Yancy replied simply, "on both counts." He reached across the small table between them, taking her hand in his. "I won't let him hurt you again, that's a promise." The touch of his hand was reassuring, his calloused palm warm against hers. Abigail believed him. More than that, she trusted him, a feeling so novel it still startled her. That night, alone in her rented room, Abigail stood by the window looking out at the unfamiliar town. Lights glowed in windows and along the streets, and in the distance, the dark expanse of the harbor reflected the stars. It wasn't just a new town, she realized. It was a new life. One she was choosing, not one being forced upon her. Whatever happened next, good or bad, it would be shaped by her own decisions, her own desires. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. But as she finally climbed into bed, Abigail found she was more excited than afraid. Yancy Fletcher was just on the other side of the door, and tomorrow they would begin building whatever came next. Together. Morning in San Diego brought a cacophony of new sounds: ship horns from the harbor, wagons on cobblestone streets, vendors calling their wares. Abigail dressed carefully in her best clothes, wanting to make a good impression on the Millers if they found them. Yancy was waiting in the hotel lobby, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He looked different, somehow more at ease in this new setting than she'd expected. "Sleep well?" he asked as she joined him. "Better than I thought I would," Abigail admitted. "It's strange being so far from everything familiar." "Good strange or bad strange?" Yancy asked, studying her face. Abigail considered. "Good strange, I think, like I can breathe properly for the first time." Yancy nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Shall we find the Millers?" They set out after breakfast, following directions from Mrs. Healy. The blacksmith shop was indeed near the docks, a sturdy building with a large forge visible through the open double doors. The sign above reads simply, Miller and Sons Blacksmithing and Ironwork. Inside, a man of about 50 was working at an anvil, his powerful arms bringing a hammer down on red-hot metal with practiced precision. Two younger men, barely more than boys, really worked nearby, clearly apprentices learning the trade. Yancy waited until the man finished his stroke before speaking. David Miller, the blacksmith looked up, sweat gleaming on his brow. For a moment he stared blankly at Yancy. Then recognition dawned in his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, setting down his hammer. "Yancy Fletcher. Been what, 8 years?" "About that," Yancy agreed with a smile. "You're looking well, David." The blacksmith wiped his hands on his leather apron before extending one to Yancy. "Can't complain, business is good." His eyes moved to Abigail. "And who's this?" "Abigail Walsh," Yancy introduced her. "Abigail, this is David Miller, one of the finest blacksmiths in California." David Miller's handshake was firm but gentle, his dark eyes kind as they took in Abigail's fading bruises. "Miss Walsh," he greeted her, "any friend of Yancy's is welcome here." There was a question in his eyes as they returned to Yancy, not suspicious but curious. Yancy seemed to understand. "We've come from Julian," he explained. "Looking for a fresh start, thought San Diego might be the place for it." Understanding seemed to pass between the men. David nodded. "Best come to the house," he said. "Sarah will want to see you. Boys, mind the forge," he added to his apprentices. The Miller home was attached to the back of the shop, a spacious, well-kept house that spoke of comfortable circumstances. Sarah Miller, a handsome woman with silver threading her dark hair, met them at the door with surprise that quickly turned to warm welcome. "Yancy Fletcher," she exclaimed. "After all these years. And you've brought a friend." Over coffee in the Millers' cozy kitchen, Yancy explained their situation, a simplified version that omitted the worst details, but made it clear that Abigail had fled an abusive father and needed a new beginning. Sarah's expression grew serious as she listened, her eyes occasionally moving to Abigail's bruised face. When Yancy finished, she reached across the table to squeeze Abigail's hand. "You're safe now, dear," she said firmly, "and you've found a good man in Yancy. Though I suspect you know that already." Abigail felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but she didn't correct the assumption. Whatever was growing between her and Yancy, it was too new, too fragile to define just yet. David cleared his throat. "You'll be looking for work, I expect." Yancy nodded. "I know horses, thought I might find something at the livery or one of the freighting companies." "Shouldn't be difficult," David confirmed. "Town's growing fast, lots of need for good horsemen." He glanced at Abigail. "What about you, Miss Walsh? Any particular skills?" "I keep accounts," Abigail said, "and I sew reasonably well. I'm willing to learn anything needed." Sarah and David exchanged a glance. "As it happens," Sarah said, "we've been looking for someone to help with the shop accounts. Our oldest boy, Thomas, has been doing it, but he's more interested in the forge than the books. It's not glamorous work," David added, "but it's steady and it pays fair." Abigail felt a surge of hope. "I'd be very interested, Mr. Miller." "And you'd need a place to stay," Sarah continued. "Both of you?" She looked between Abigail and Yancy, a slight hesitation in her expression. Yancy understood the unasked question. "Separate accommodations for now," he clarified. "We're taking things slowly." Sarah nodded approvingly. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over run by my cousin, Harriet Summers. Very respectable, and she has rooms available. I could speak to her this afternoon." "That would be most helpful," Yancy said gratefully. By day's end, arrangements had been made. Abigail would begin working in the Miller forge the following day, helping with accounts and correspondence. Yancy had an interview with the owner of a large livery stable who needed an experienced horse trainer. They moved into Mrs. Summers' boarding house that same evening, Abigail in a small but pleasant room on the 2nd floor, Yancy in a similar accommodation down the hall. The other boarders were primarily working people like themselves, shop clerks, seamstresses, a school teacher, respectable folk of modest means. That night, Abigail sat on her bed, looking around the simple room that was now hers. For the first time in her life, she was truly independent. Her father had no authority here, no control over her movements or decisions. A soft knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. She opened it to find Yancy standing there, his expression a mixture of concern and something warmer. "Just wanted to check that you're settling in all right," he said. Abigail nodded. "It's perfect, small but mine." Yancy smiled at that. "Freedom looks good on you, Abigail Walsh." The compliment made her blush. "Thank you for everything, Yancy. I wouldn't be here if not for you." "You'd have found your way," he countered. "You're stronger than you know." They stood looking at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Yancy stepped back slightly. "I should let you rest," he said. "Big day tomorrow." "Yes," Abigail agreed, though part of her wished he would stay longer. "Good night, Yancy." "Good night, Abigail." He hesitated, then leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sweet dreams." As he walked away down the hall, Abigail touched the spot where his lips had been, warmth spreading through her at the simple gesture. Whatever this was between them, it was growing stronger each day. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope for what it might become. The days that followed took on a rhythm. Abigail worked at the Miller Forge 6 days a week, keeping the accounts in order and writing correspondence. She discovered she had a knack for the work, finding satisfaction in the neat columns of figures and the organized ledgers. Yancy secured the position at Henderson's livery, where his expertise with horses quickly made him valuable. Within weeks, he was handling the most difficult animals, turning unruly colts into dependable mounts that commanded good prices. They saw each other daily, sharing breakfast and dinner at the boarding house, sometimes walking together in the evenings along the harbor front. Gradually, their relationship deepened. Yancy began holding her hand during these walks, and occasionally when they parted at night, he would kiss her cheek or forehead. It was proper, respectable, perhaps frustratingly so at times, but Abigail understood his caution. After what she'd been through, Yancy was giving her time to find her footing, to be certain of what she wanted. And what did she want? As the weeks passed, Abigail became increasingly sure. She wanted Yancy Fletcher, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his gentle hands that never struck in anger. She wanted the future they might build together if he wanted it too. Autumn turned to winter, bringing cooler temperatures to San Diego, though no true cold. Christmas approached, and with it, a feeling of permanence to their new life. Abigail had saved enough from her wages to buy new clothes and a few small luxuries. She had friends now: Sarah Miller, some of the other boarders, the shopkeepers who greeted her by name. One evening in early December, Yancy invited her to dinner at a small restaurant near the harbor, a special occasion, he said, though he wouldn't explain why. Abigail wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her eyes, and spent extra time arranging her hair. The restaurant was more elegant than their usual haunts, with white tablecloths and real glass in the windows. Yancy had reserved a table near the back, private but with a view of the harbor. He looked handsome in a new shirt and vest, his hair recently trimmed. "You look beautiful," he said as he held her chair, the admiration in his eyes making her blush. "Thank you," she replied, settling her napkin in her lap. "Are you going to tell me what we're celebrating?" Yancy smiled, a hint of nervousness in the expression. "Several things, actually." He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope, which he placed on the table between them. "First, this arrived today." Abigail opened the envelope to find a letter written in an official hand. It was from Sheriff Peters of Julian, addressed to Yancy. As she read, her heart began to pound. "William Walsh has left the area," the letter stated. Following multiple complaints about his behavior and an incident involving firearms, he was given the choice to depart voluntarily or face charges. He chose to leave, reportedly heading north to Oregon Territory. "The ranch property has been sold to satisfy debts." Abigail looked up, hardly daring to believe it. "He's gone, truly gone," Yancy nodded, his expression serious but relieved. According to Peters, yes, and he's not a man to make such statements lightly. So we're safe. Abigail whispered, the full implication dawning on her. It seems so, Yancy confirmed. Of course, there's always a chance he could return someday, but it's unlikely, Abigail finished for him. Especially if he started over somewhere else. She set down the letter, emotions warring within her relief, yes, but also a strange sense of loss. The man who had caused her so much pain was gone, but he was still her father, the only family she had. Yancy reached across the table to take her hand. Are you all right? Abigail nodded slowly. Yes, I think so. It's complicated, but mostly I'm relieved. She looked at him curiously. You said there were several things to celebrate. Something shifted in Yancy's expression, then nervousness giving way to determination. He kept hold of her hand as he spoke. I've been offered a partnership, he said. At Henderson's. Old man Henderson wants to scale back his involvement, focus more on his ranch outside town. He's offering me a third share of the business. Yancy, that's wonderful, Abigail exclaimed. You've certainly earned it. It comes with living quarters, Yancy continued. Small but decent, above the stables. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. Big enough for two if that's something you might consider. Abigail's heart skipped a beat. Are you asking? Yancy's grip on her hand tightened slightly. I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife, Abigail Walsh. Though she'd begun to hope for exactly this, the actual moment left Abigail speechless. Yancy misinterpreted her silence, quickly adding, I know it hasn't been that long. If you need more time, yes, Abigail interrupted, finding her voice. Yes, Yancy, I would very much like to become your wife. Relief and joy transformed Yancy's face. You're sure? I'm not exactly a wealthy man and the living quarters are modest. I don't need wealth, Abigail said firmly. I need a good man who treats me with respect, who sees me as a partner, not a possession. She smiled, blinking back tears of happiness. I need you, Yancy Fletcher. Yancy stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, heedless of the curious glances from other diners. From his pocket, he produced a small box which he opened to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, he explained. Not fancy, but it's perfect, Abigail assured him, extending her trembling hand. Yancy slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips. I'll spend my life making you happy, Abigail. That's my promise to you. You already do, she whispered, cupping his cheek with her free hand. There in the small restaurant, with the sun setting over the harbor outside, Yancy Fletcher kissed his future bride properly for the first time, a kiss of promise, of passion carefully banked, of a future neither had dared to imagine just months before. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Methodist church near the harbor. Sarah Miller helped Abigail make a wedding dress of pale blue silk, not traditional white, but beautiful and practical enough to wear again. Yancy wore a new suit, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the formal attire but handsome nonetheless. David Miller gave Abigail away, while Sarah stood as her matron of honor. Henderson, Yancy's employer and now partner, served as best man. The congregation was small but warm friends they'd made in their months in San Diego, fellow boarders from Mrs. Summers' establishment, business associates who'd come to respect them both. The minister spoke of new beginnings and God's grace in bringing them together. Abigail found herself thinking of the long, terrified run from her father's ranch, of Yancy's cabin appearing like a haven in the wilderness. Providence or chance, she was grateful beyond words for the path that had led her here. When they exchanged vows, Yancy's voice was steady and sure. Abigail's trembled slightly with emotion, but her certainty was absolute. This man, this quiet, honorable man who had risked everything for a stranger, was now her husband, her partner, her family. After the ceremony, there was a modest reception at the Millers' home. Food and drink flowed freely, and even the usually reserved Yancy smiled more than Abigail had ever seen. When David Miller proposed a toast to the newlyweds, everyone raised their glasses enthusiastically. To Yancy and Abigail Fletcher, David declared. May your courage be rewarded with long years of happiness. As evening approached, they took their leave amid good-natured teasing and heartfelt well wishes. Yancy had prepared their new home above the livery with care, the small apartment freshly painted and furnished simply, but comfortably. There were even flowers on the table, a touch that made Abigail suspect Sarah Miller's involvement. Alone at last, Abigail felt a flutter of nervousness. This was her wedding night, a prospect that, given her observations of her parents' marriage, had once filled her with dread. But this was Yancy, who had never been anything but gentle with her. As if sensing her thoughts, Yancy approached slowly, taking her hands in his. "There's no rush," he said softly. "For anything, we have all the time in the world now." Gratitude washed through Abigail at his understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I'm not afraid, not with you," and she wasn't. Not when Yancy kissed her with increasing passion, not when he helped her out of her wedding dress with reverent hands. Not even when they came together as husband and wife for the first time, his touch always gentle, always considerate of her comfort and pleasure. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the curtains, Abigail marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From terror to safety. From isolation to connection. From a house ruled by fear to a home built on love. "What are you thinking?" Yancy murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm happy," Abigail replied honestly. "Truly happy, perhaps for the first time in my life." Yancy's arms tightened around her. "That's all I want," he said simply. "To make you happy, to keep you safe." "You do," Abigail assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest over his heart, "and I'll spend my life doing the same for you." In the years that followed, they built a life together that far exceeded their modest expectations. Henderson's livery thrived under Yancy's expert management, eventually becoming Fletcher and Henderson's when Yancy bought a larger share of the business. Abigail continued working for the Millers, until their first child was born, a son they named Thomas Aaron Fletcher, after David Miller's eldest boy and their friend, Aaron Randall. When Thomas was 2, Abigail gave birth to a daughter, Eleanor Sarah, named for Yancy's first wife and their dear friend Sarah Miller. Yancy wept when he first held her, overcome by the strange mixture of past grief and present joy that the moment represented. They expanded their living quarters as their family grew, eventually buying a small house near the harbor with a garden for the children to play in. Yancy remained a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. His gentle handling of their children, his unfailing support for Abigail's ventures, his steadfast reliability in all things large and small. William Walsh never returned to their lives. Occasionally, they would hear rumors that he'd remarried in Oregon, that he'd lost everything gambling, that he'd died in a barroom brawl. Whether any of these stories were true, they never knew with certainty. But as the years passed, the shadow he had cast over Abigail's life gradually faded, replaced by the warm light of the family she and Yancy had created together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yancy surprised Abigail with a special gift, a daguerreotype portrait of their family, professionally taken and handsomely framed. It showed Abigail seated with 5-year-old Eleanor on her lap, 8-year-old Thomas standing beside her, and Yancy behind them, one hand resting protectively on Abigail's shoulder. "For the mantle," Yancy explained, "so we never forget how far we've come." Abigail studied the image, noting how different she looked from the frightened young woman who had stumbled onto Yancy's porch a decade earlier. Her face was fuller now, her eyes clearer, her expression serene. She had become the woman she was always meant to be: strong, capable, loved. "It's perfect," she said, leaning into her husband's embrace, "just like our life together." Yancy kissed the top of her head, his arm secure around her waist. "Not perfect," he corrected gently, "but ours, built with our own hands, our own choices." And that, Abigail reflected as she looked at their children playing in the garden beyond the window, was the greatest gift Yancy Fletcher had given her. Not just safety or love, though both were precious beyond measure. But the chance to choose to build a life on her own terms, with a partner who valued her strength as much as he cherished her softness, from terror to triumph, from fleeing to finding, from a father's violence to a husband's tenderness. Abigail Walsh Fletcher's journey had been an unlikely one, but standing in her own home, surrounded by the family she and Yancy had created together, she wouldn't have changed a single step of the path that had led her here.